Another weekend in the books and another couple of wins for the Milwaukee Bucks. They're 9-0 on the season. The franchise record start continues, and they even had to do it on one game without Giannis. We can talk about MarJon Beauchamp having the best game of his short NBA career. Brook Lopez is doing a bunch of scoring. Drew Holiday does seem like he's found his rhythm, but there is plenty to talk about. By the way, Bobby Portis eating rebounds on the weekend as well is certainly notable. Let's talk some basketball.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday, and also find my work over at ESPN. And alongside me, the founder of BrewHoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden, for today's episode that is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com. Use the promo code Locked On there. Of course, we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen or first watch of every day. I have to apologize. No podcast on Friday. International travel, Frank, you know how it is. It's sometimes it sneaks up on you. So I had to make a quick trip to New Zealand. And by the way, my first time in New Zealand, my first time traveling overseas since I moved back from Milwaukee at the start of the pandemic. And I know I've had a couple of Kiwi friends reach out that listen to the podcast. So, you know, it never ceases to amaze me, the corners of the world that people listen to Locked On Bucks. So shout out to our Kiwi friends if you're listening to this. And make sure you subscribe on YouTube, on the audio platform, wherever you listen. That helps us out. And jump on YouTube and specifically comment, get involved in the conversation. But I don't know what that voice was I did before we started this podcast. It was like a mix of Jim Paschke and Sean Connery, I think.
Yeah,
but either way,
felt like a lot more Sean Connery than what I was expecting.
I won't do it again. I think that's safe to say. But the Bucks are 9-0. I think we were discussing last week at some point that anytime you have a back-to-back and a road home back-to-back, it's really short turnaround. We weren't sure if Giannis was going to play both of these games. I think the idea that the Bucks could lose one of these games, even if it's not against superior opposition, was well and truly on the table. But ultimately, they handled both of these games pretty comfortably. I don't know where you want to start with these games, but 9-0 it sits pretty nice with me.
Yeah. I mean, we came into this regular season, as people who've been listening to us, know that we were just like, hey, just try to bank some wins, pretty soft early part of the schedule here after the opener, given just the 6 home games in a row. And obviously right now, even at 9-0, you've only played a couple road games. So, obviously I would say at this point, right, the schedule has been fairly advantageous. Obviously, some of the teams that you would say have been the toughest matchups, right? You would have said, well, Philly and Brooklyn, and obviously both those teams have had really slow starts. And then on top of that, I think probably Atlanta is Atlanta the best win. I guess. But Minnesota, obviously really talented team. Rudy Gobert apparently has COVID, so let's just get that out of the way. Like, I'm hoping we don't hear that, Giannis and all the guys that had to go up against him and hugged in post game don't go to the health and safety protocols this coming week. That would be not ideal, but that also just underscores why, again, you just want to rack up these wins while you can, and to do it while shorthanded, obviously, you just sort of, it's just fun kind of continue to rack up these wins. And I think 2 wins that were, kind of fun for different reasons. Friday, as you mentioned, Giannis goes, but really did not have his A game, finished 7 out of 17 from the field, 10 for 20 from the foul line, which was particularly painful for me. He was 7 of 8 to start, then goes 3 for 12 to finish. I think he missed his last 4, which again didn't really matter because the game was out of hand, and he had just a sensational fourth quarter, even with all those free throw misses. Just kind of decided, like, all right, you know what? It's been cute, Timberwolves. You guys have been sort of hanging around this game, but I'm going to just pretty much shut the door on you guys, slam the door, really. Let's not say shut. It was not a friendly closing of the door, but it was a door slamming on them. And so, Giannis, for a national TV audience, giving a little reminder of what he's been doing. The 30-point streak comes to an end. Should have had it, if you just make some damn free throws. But, so it goes. He does end up getting the triple-double. And probably the weirdest stat, well, not the weirdest, but one of the weird stats of the early regular season. If you had told me that Giannis would have a triple-double in which 5 of his 11 assists would go to MarJon Beauchamp, that would have surprised me. I would not have expected that. But MarJon it was a very rookie roller coaster weekend for him. Friday, has the terrific kind of breakout performance, hits a couple threes, gets a couple layups, basically kind of running. Giannis finds him and then finishes the game in the last couple minutes with 2 dunks, one leaking out for Giannis's triple-double assist. And then Giannis flips the ball to him in the corner and has a really quick, nice drive and another dunk finish. And again, okay, maybe not the most engaged Timberwolves defense at that point. But obviously just you have to feel great for him. And, I mentioned it on Twitter on Friday, but, there's so many reasons that we can look at Giannis as this incredible player, the things he's able to do. But it wasn't just Friday night, right? We've seen it all week as Beauchamp was starting to get minutes over the past week. We saw Giannis really try to get him the ball, sometimes maybe a little too much, but you could tell he really wanted to get him involved, really wanted to give him confidence. I think I'm sure Giannis appreciates, the journey that MarJon's been on and what he's had to do to get to this point, right? Giannis obviously had a really difficult journey to get to the NBA as well. And we know, you can go back through a lot of these guys, right? Thon Maker, obviously, maybe most notably, these young guys that he really kind of takes a liking to and takes under his wing and, does what he can to get them, put them in positions to succeed. And before Friday, they hadn't exactly kind of figured it out with him. MarJon had, hit a couple shots here and there, but was mostly sort of just trying to get his legs under him. But obviously it was fun to see Budenholzer sort of start to try to feed him minutes. Jordan Ward has been, speaking of roller coasters, just super up and down offensively. And I don't know, I just don't really think we're ever going to see it defensively or playmaking wise from Jordan. He just kind of is what he is at this point. But, we've seen both those guys continue to play. And Friday, obviously fun to see MarJon kind of have his coming out party in a big road win. And then Saturday was the downside of the roller coaster as he goes 1 for 9. Clearly needed Giannis's playmaking, right? Giannis sitting that one out due to the knee, which again, I think at this point, I almost don't bat an eye at when Giannis sits out, the second game of the back-to-back with that knee soreness on the injury report. We're just kind of used to it. He's listed as probable for this game Monday night in Atlanta. So, hopefully we expect to see him back there. But yeah, just Friday night, I would say was just a fun game. Giannis sort of doing enough of what he does and, really didn't have his A game. I thought the Wolves had some, good defensive moments against him as well. But again, when this team has needed other people, right, as much as they've needed Giannis to dominate early in the season, and he's been obviously the engine of everything, when they've needed it, they've gotten big performances from other guys. And you just look at this weekend, right? Jrue Holiday had his 3rd straight big scoring game on Friday night, just, totally in control. Those early season yips that we saw kind of feel like they're far in the rearview mirror at this point. And Bobby Portis just sticking shots from the corners whenever the Bucks needed them. And I think we do need to give Bobby Portis a shout out on this podcast. You sort of teased it. He has 21 rebounds on Saturday. He got the Bobby chants in Minnesota on Friday night, which was a lot of fun. Sounds like, you could tell there were a ton of Bucks fans in the building. Bobby Portis, right? He comes in Milwaukee, obviously had his reputation as a guy that put up numbers, but wasn't a winning player. His first season, he plays really well, has some up and downs during the playoffs, but ends up being a guy that gives you huge minutes, hits 2 big shots in fourth quarter of a championship clinching game 6. Could have opted out to go chase money after that first season. Says, no, you know what? I'm going to come back. maybe a little wink, wink, that he was going to get paid after the second season, but he comes back and was really good again, right? There's no letdown for him last season. Again, maybe in the playoffs against Boston, right? Didn't play as well as you would have wanted, but certainly as a regular season player was really, really good again last year. And then he gets the big payday and you're like, okay, last year he started a lot. What kind of does this year hold in store for him? We heard over the summer, no question. Hey, Brook's the starter, sixth man of the year. That's what he's going to focus on, right? I mean, again, just saying all the right things. Never worrying about him and what he's going to be doing. What anything off court, anything locker room, any of that stuff. And he hasn't shot the ball that well. I think he's at like 32% or something like that here early in the season from three. So I think, again, some of the shooting will come around a little bit. We saw it really over the last couple of games that some of those 3-pointers have started to fall, but he's been huge on the glass. And, just look at the numbers, obviously, being the third big night in and night out. We occasionally see some Serge Ibaka. We saw a fair bit of him on Saturday night, obviously. I thought Serge actually acquitted himself pretty well. But yeah, Bobby got paid, but, we're still the same Bobby, right? Not that we expected anything different, but it's just really fun kind of seeing him just continuing to be the guy that, has made him a legendary figure here in not even 3 full seasons in Milwaukee. Like I said, 20 years from now, Bobby Portis won't be having to buy any paying for any meals in the city of Milwaukee probably. So lots of fun performances over this weekend. There was MarJon on Friday, Drew on Friday, Saturday, Brook, Grayson Allen, Javon Carter, right? I think it's really just the story of this first kind of 2-3 weeks here of the season, just the fact that on any given night, it's any number of 6-7 guys who could be stepping up and making big shots or making big plays defensively. And it's just been a ton of fun to watch. We'll see how long they can keep this undefeated run going. I think Monday night in Atlanta will probably be the biggest test that they've faced so far. But who knows? Who are we to doubt it, right?
So you mentioned Javon Carter, you mentioned Grayson Allen, and I think there's an interesting conversation that did arise over the weekend in regards to potentially what happens with the starting lineup once guys come back, because both guys have made a little bit of a case. Perhaps Javon Carter has been the one that's made a bigger case to fit in certain ways. So let's get into that conversation, but I want to talk about Prize Picks. And I tell you what, if you were playing Prize Picks on the weekend against the Oklahoma City Thunder and you had Bobby Portis for the over for rebounds, you would have been sipping on a victory margarita by halfway through the second quarter, I reckon, because you knew that Bobby Portis was on absolute fire. So if you don't know what Prize Picks is all about, you have to pick 2 to 5 players and basically the over or under on their Prize Picks projection, and you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections that are available. There's also NFL, MLB, well, that's done and dusted now, NHL, PGA golf, and all college sports as well, among other things. So check it out at prizepicks.com. And entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. So don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. That's Prize Picks Daily Fantasy made easy. Also, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. Unless for any particular reason in the state of Wisconsin you're avoiding any and all NFL news, but they have you covered with football and the wrap-up from the World Series, NBA, all the drama going on around the NBA, which is nonstop. So check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast after you're done with Locked On Bucks. So MarJon Beauchamp, as you pointed to, a quieter day without Giannis. And we should say, what role players all around the league, and there has been role players in Milwaukee as well, they benefit from playing alongside the greats. And Giannis makes everyone better. He gets them easy baskets, as you pointed to, with all the assists he had in the game against Minnesota. So it's probably not a huge surprise. But Beauchamp gets the start. Grayson Allen goes to the bench. And full credit to Grayson Allen. He puts up 19 points. Shot the ball really, really well. But it is interesting because still at this point, you're talking about a team that offensively is just battling. They're 18th in the league for offensive rating. Last time I checked, it was around 112, 112.0, I think the offensive rating for the Bucks. So yeah, around 16th or 17th in the league. So they're not even in the top half. So the offense, for the most part, Giannis generates a lot of it, and then you've got some pretty good individual performances as we've broke down. But they're still missing Khris Middleton. I think it's fair to say there is a Twitter page out there that suggests that the Bucks perhaps should get rid of Middleton because they're undefeated. I didn't see. I didn't see. I think the page just says now Bucks 9-0 without Middleton. By the way, I didn't see the Twitter page start up Bucks 1-0 without Giannis. But that buffoon that has started that Twitter page maybe should have consider that moving forward. But what do you see with the starting lineup? If everyone's healthy, Khris comes in. What do you think? Last year, obviously, it was Wesley Matthews came into the starting lineup for the postseason run. Javon Carter's had a crack. Grayson Allen's obviously been there. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's probably not going to be MarJon Beauchamp, but how do you see this shaking out?
I think for the regular season, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is Jrue Holiday and his defensive workload, right? We know that in the postseason, his defensive workload is going to be enormous. And we saw it the last 2 years, right? Like the work he does pressuring the ball, being able to defend multiple positions is obviously hugely valuable. I think, when we think about kind of like how you pace your best players during the regular season, I look at Javon Carter, and he was awesome on Saturday night, right? I mean, just shot the lights out, 18 points. I mean, it was funny. Going into that game, I thought, well, no Giannis, no Khris. You really need Jrue to kind of just at least like duel Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to like a draw, like just don't have like Shai go off for 35 and Jrue have a bad shooting night. And Jrue just really didn't look for his shot, right? I mean, he was 3 for 10, but like really was not, really was in facilitator mode for basically the vast majority of the night. And what did he have? How many assists did he have? 13 assists, right? So he was getting the job done, and the Bucks were, we started to see over the weekend the 3-point shooting kind of come alive a little bit. But I think with Javon, I think he's at 34% from 3 for the year, 36% on twos, right? Like obviously he's got limitations as a scorer, not really much of a playmaker. Like he's never really going to do much like in a pick and roll or something like that, like create for others. But I think just especially in the regular season, where on most nights there is at least one opposing guard who is a little smaller, that probably doesn't want to get pressured all up and down the floor, and is going to try to run pick and rolls, and having a pesky guy like Javon to go over pick and rolls and try to get in passing lanes and get strips and things like that. I think I would probably at this point try Carter as the second guard with Jrue in the backcourt when Khris comes back. And it's not really so much of a dig on Grayson, because I think his shooting, especially in a lineup with Giannis, that's obviously the appeal. I think on Saturday night they were probably thinking like, well, we need to kind of balance our offense a little bit, given that Jrue is starting. I think part of the rationale was like, you've got Jrue and Brook starting as kind of two, skill offensive guys, and Bobby obviously not coming off the bench because no Giannis. So how did you kind of get some scoring punch into the second unit? And Grayson delivered exactly what you were hoping for him to get, right? He had 6 of 8 shots overall, 19 points. A lot of those in the first half. I think he scored 16 in the first half. So he was really good, did exactly what you would have wanted in that role. So again, Grayson as a starter in the regular season, totally fine with that. I think like Javon as a starter against like the Celtics, I don't know about that, right? Because the Boston just plays so big. But I think against most teams, whether, if you're playing Philly, you've got Maxey, right? Which we saw him lined up and bothering Maxey on opening night. Obviously against the Nets, he was the one tasked with just kind of being annoying to Kyrie for much of the night. And we'll see kind of as the Bucks kind of continue to make their rounds around the league. Obviously, he was the one. He has a long history with Trae Young, actually. West Virginia, I think kind of beat Oklahoma when Trey was a freshman.
Yeah.
I think Trey had a bad game with him kind of really harassing. Obviously, Trey was a monster in that Atlanta game. He scored a ton of points, right? I think he only had 5 assists, so it was pretty much the Bucks just forced him to score a lot, take a ton of shots. We'll see how things go on Monday, but yeah, I mean, I think at this point, I'm okay with sort of just using Javon as that, at least for the foreseeable future, kind of keeping him in that role. But I do think it's interesting, right? I think we've talked about on the pod, early in the season here, Brook Lopez's minutes have been pretty high. He's been under 32 of the last 3 games, which I think is good. I don't want to run Brook's minutes too high, given what you're going to need from him in the playoffs. But one of the really nice things is like Wes Matthews really has not had to play much at all, right? They have not had to rely a ton on Wes in these games. He's had some big 3-point shots in fourth quarters, most notably on opening night. But he's been a guy that has, again, not had to play a ton. He's averaging 15 minutes a game. He's played in every game. And I think when you just think about kind of conserving guys' legs, I think Wes is one of those guys that, I think it would have been natural to say like, oh, we'll really rely on Wes here, given the lack of depth you have on the wing. But I think it's a big plus the Bucks have been able to get by without needing to use Wes a ton. He's obviously been a key guy late in games, given that he's part of that kind of really switchable configuration you can go to with Drew in him in the backcourt. But I mean, again, I like to think I'm a Javon Carter realist, but give him credit. I think his defensive effort, I think he's, especially quarters 1 through 3, better against small guards than Drew, just because he's going to work harder and Drew kind of picks his spots more. So yeah, I'll vote Javon at this point. And again, whether that's the case, I don't think I would vote that way if you were telling me that we had to start a series against the Celtics next week. But I think, again, in game 9 of 82, I like what he's done defensively. And I think, obviously, you can't argue with the starters' success and kind of where they are right now.
Joey Ingles will be, by the time the playoffs roll around, he'll be in there talking trash to everyone out there on the floor. But no, I think it's a great point. I mean, when we discussed this in the preseason, we kind of thought that they would maybe steer clear of West for the reasons you already mentioned, preserve him as best you can, because you think that if he's healthy going into the postseason, he's a guy that you can trust, based on what we've seen previously. And I just looked up his game logs for this season, so it won't surprise you that he's only actually cracked 20 minutes on 3 occasions this season, but 2 of those times were opening night against Philadelphia and then the game against Brooklyn. So he's been used sparingly, but you feel like when Bud's like, okay, this is a big game, we want to win these games, these are the matchups we think we can put Wesley Matthews out there for defensive purposes. He's done that. And then, of course, we know he obviously hit that big 3 on opening night as well. The other guy that I just wanted to shout out, as you have a little bit already, Brook Lopez. This man is shooting 66% on 2s this year. Now, he's only taking 5.2 a game, and he's taking 6.3 threes a game, that's who he is. We understand that and what he does for this offense and spacing the floor and all those types of things. But we've seen it time and time again over the last few years. Unfortunately, last year, not as much as we would have liked because he wasn't playing. But when Giannis goes out, Brook, time after time, has been a guy that's like, all right, I'll get you 25. I can still do that. He's definitely a defensive force for this team. He anchors the defense. We know that he's sort of that all defense caliber guy. But still the ability to, on different nights through the regular season, and we've seen it in the postseason, to say, you know what, Brook Lopez is just an absolutely humongous man with excellent touch near the basket. Let's utilize him in the paint. But 66%, it's a pretty scorching start for the big fella. You're on mute there, but it looks like you were telling a cracker.
It's gone forever. It was the best. It was the best line ever uttered on the show. Brook is funny because, we've talked. I remember after the loss to Toronto in the first year of the Bud era, talking with Eric, our friend Eric Name, co-host at the time, about how
he's old news.
About how one of the things I wanted to see the next year was utilizing Brook Lopez more as an interior scorer. And I think I probably also said like, oh, like let's use Brook Lopez more as a post threat, especially when Giannis is out of the game. And it's funny because I think one of the Bucks deserve a lot of credit. Like if you go back and look at the game 5 against Atlanta when he had 32 points or whatever it might have been, none of those baskets came on post looks. It was all, rim runs, random stuff around the basket. It was not like traditional post up stuff. And it's funny because I think Brook has such amazing touch that when he does get post touches, he settles for those like just slow motion, one-legged step back, super high degree of difficulty fadeaway jumpers, which he still shoots like 50% on because he's got just absurd touch, right?
Remember that possession? What game was it last week where he like had his back to the basket and they passed him the ball and he just stood there for like 2 seconds, even though there was no one defending him. And then he took a one-legged fadeaway and knocked it down. And he was laughing as he was running down the field. But it's exactly what you're describing. It's like he was just kind of stuck, and he's like, I'll shoot a fadeaway. Which of course he's so big, he doesn't need to shoot a one-legged fadeaway, but he does it so well.
Yeah. I mean, I guess he would argue that like, well, they're unblockable. So, like
true,
whatever. You're not wrong. But yeah, I mean, like, are those, good shots, the shots you want from a guy like him? I would probably say not. So he does have a tendency, like when he's in the post to settle a little bit. I love the like pick and roll action. Again, we sort of, a lot of people are saying like, well, he's a pick and pop guy now, but I mean, the Bucks do really, especially when Giannis is out, the Bucks really do try to get him setting screens and rolling to the rim because he's such an enormous target for lobs and finishing around the basket. And I thought that was one of the things I noticed on Saturday night is like he was actually like catching and like getting his momentum from the post going towards the actual basket. And there were a couple plays. I think he had some moments like that against Detroit too, where just use that like enormous size and frame. And it's wild. He really is so skilled, with his touch and with his footwork and everything, that when he kind of decides to go do something, again, sometimes it's happening, at what seems to be, 1/3 regular speed, but he's so big. It's just most guys just can't really do much about it. So yeah, I mean, it was just really fun. I mean, his 3 points, I think he's around 37% from 3-point range, 50% overall right now. 15 points a game. Again, his minutes are up compared to what we would have expected and probably what we would want, just given what we want to do as far as seeing him be fresh for the playoffs. But he's just been great. And we talked so much in the early part of the season about his defense. Obviously, you can't say enough about how much he's contributed to the Bucks having the #1 defense in the league. But yeah, I mean, offensively, just knowing that when you are shorthanded, and the Bucks have been shorthanded for the first 9 games of this season, knowing that you can rely on him to, on any given night, either be that outside threat or be a threat inside or both. It's just been obviously a huge plus. And again, just, Brook Lopez, another guy that you just look at and, I mean, I feel like there's been obviously more people. There's always been that like kind of subset of Bucks fans who, think that he's too slow or think of drop defense as being some like problem for the Bucks, right? Rather than one of the key parts of them winning a championship. But he's such a likable guy, such a great guy for that locker room, so beloved by teammates. And the fact that he's been an awesome player and just, again, continues to play at such a high level. It's just been so fun to watch. And, another guy that will never, should never have to pay for a meal in the city of Milwaukee or state of Wisconsin. So if you see Brook Lopez around, I mean, he can afford it, but, throw the guy some love, buy him a slice of Rockies, get him a burger at Cops and whatever he needs. But yeah, he's just, again, Friday night really, only took 6 shots, scored 7 points. And then Saturday when they really needed him, okay, pops up 25 points, and just gives exactly what you need.
No question. And if you do see him out in the street, you probably won't miss him because, as Frank said, I mean, this is just a humongous human being. He is just an absolute monster, and or a mountain. Some would say a splash mountain. Shout out to Brook. He's had a great start to the season, and another one of those guys that's been unselfish for the Bucks. Think about it. He could have done more in terms of getting more shots, all those types of things. But he's just played this role and just become this elite defensive big floor spacer, despite the fact his skill set, he could do a lot more than that. Before we wrap this up, I'm going to jump on. I'm doing Locked On NBA tonight as well. So check out that podcast, Locked On NBA. They said there's only one team left undefeated in a league. So do you want to come on and talk about the Bucks? I said I can do that. So I'm going to do that in a second. But I started some, minor Bobby Portis 6 Man of the Year propaganda on the podcast last week when I did a solo pod. And don't forget, you only need to play more than half your games coming off the bench to qualify. I believe that's the rule. So if Bobby Portis gets these spot starts and just absolutely stuffs the stat sheet, no one's going to remember that he started in this game, but the overall stats are going to be looking good. He is putting up 15 points and 13 rebounds right now or something like that, but per 36, he's putting up 18 points and 16 rebounds per game. He's had an unbelievable start to the season, and I think the propaganda shall continue. What do you think?
He's at 13 and 11 in raw terms, but only playing 26 minutes per game right now. As we talked about last week, I think he's a candidate to play more as the season goes on. I think because of Brook probably having maybe his minutes ramped down just a little bit, right? So I would expect Bobby's minutes, if anything, they're going to go up a little bit. And I think he's at 33% shooting from 3 right now. I think that number probably will go up. Again, he's always been higher than that in his career, and certainly in the last 2 seasons, he's been really good. And I think it just whatever. We're still in kind of small sample size theater. So yeah, shout out to Bobby. He's been just really fun to watch, and yes, Bobby Portis appreciation, always a good thing to bring up on the pod. And yeah, shout out to Bobby, man. It's just as a Packer fan, the Packers have. I heard the stat today that the Brewers have more recently won a baseball game than the Packers have won a football game, which seems like a problem given that the MLB playoffs just ended and the Brewers weren't even in the Major League Baseball playoffs. So just an all-time bad vibes Packer team. So it is making me more appreciative than ever about not just the Bucks winning, whatever, that they're 9-0, but even if the Bucks were 6-3, right? Just the vibes around this team, the characters you have in the locker room, the leaders that you have, starting with Giannis, just the type of people they are, on top of obviously being Giannis, just being this incredible force of nature and the best player on the planet. Again, we say it a lot, but don't take Giannis for granted. Don't take this Bucks team for granted. Let's enjoy this, and certainly the Packer experience. Obviously, whatever, like Aaron Rodgers, late 30s, right? It's not like we can compare him to where the Bucks are, especially with a guy like Giannis and at not even 28. But I don't know. I'm always very conscious, right? You just never know how long your title window, your championship window.
Yeah.
Stuff changes real quickly, and kind of fitting. I thought of it today. They're going to Atlanta tonight. I just think back to what was it, game 4? Yeah, I guess game 4 in Atlanta of these finals. If Giannis was immortal and does something horrible to that knee that prevents him from playing, a week and a half later, who knows where we'd be, right? As a fan base, where this team would be as a franchise, right? You just never know what might happen. And so you just appreciate good health, knock on wood, great players doing great things. And I think just the continuity and just the stability of this team, right? You just see with all the drama and all these other great teams right now. Just give credit not only to the Bucks players, but Mike Budenholzer. I saw on Friday there was a graphic. ESPN had a graphic early in the game, first quarter. They just had a shot of Bud, probably making some whatever Bud face, and it said Mike Budenholzer, 2021 NBA champ, and I was like, damn right. I nearly brought up my camera and was going to take a picture of that, very unsophisticated screenshot and post it and just write damn right. 2021 NBA champ.
Cop that, haters.
But I think that's the ultimate thing that people kind of take for granted, right? Like we all try to even though we're not well qualified to really understand, and very few people are qualified to really understand, kind of comment on tactics and adjustments and things like that. People love to try to comment on those things about coaches, and Bud's gotten grief about these things in the past. And, some of it I think has been fair to an extent, but people always take for granted just like the fact that he showed up and instantly the Bucks had this like winning culture, and it lets you do things like on Saturday. I used to, when the Spurs used to do this, I'd call it infrastructure wins. Like, how the Spurs used to just like rest Tony Parker and Manu and like just bring out random dudes and like, win by 20 on the road against decent teams. And, the Bucks have been able to do a lot of that. And I just think of it as, again, just having a team that knows their identity. There's no egos on this team. And so much of that starts with your coach and the coaching staff that he's developed. And, I don't think it's any coincidence that so many of Bud's guys have gone on to be head coaches elsewhere. And so while we're doing appreciation threads, right? You're 9-0. Let's just do some appreciation. Let's give some Mike Budenholzer appreciation, some Mike Budenholzer props. I think people can quibble over, well, they should have been doing some of this stuff that, cutting down opponents and 3-pointers, saying like, well, they should have been doing that before, right? It's like, well, they actually, like, you look at what Phoenix did in particular in the finals, like they completely took away corner threes. They didn't take many threes. They played, I think, much more honestly than we typically think of the Bucks and their, overhelping defense. But I think making that change going into this season, it does feel, we'll kind of see what happens, right? Like the Bucks actually gave up, they've been averaging, they're at 16 wide open threes per game right now. 29 they allowed against the Thunder, which it just felt like they were just like, all these random dudes that we don't know, like whatever. We're not going to defend these random dudes shooting threes. So that was a bit of an aberration that completely, was like double what they've been averaging in terms of conceding wide open threes. But for the most part, obviously they have played somewhat differently. And it seems like there is, it's like they had to do something to like get people like really engaged, right? To not just be like, okay, we're just kind of doing what we're always doing. And, Eric wrote the article on Friday, which I thought was really interesting, about them also really trying to put an emphasis on crashing the glass. Friday wasn't really that big of a factor, but Saturday, 40% offensive rebound rate, which is a huge number. So again, just kind of like, they've had so much continuity in terms of the roster that it's interesting that they're, kind of using some of these tactical tweaks to not only just get better, but I think also just make guys really have to engage and not just kind of like go into autopilot, which, as we were saying, that was my biggest concern about this team, was just, do you fall into this trap of just sort of like not mailing in the regular season, but maybe just sort of like cruise controlling sim to end, the regular season, because that what really matters is the playoffs. And obviously that hasn't happened so far. At some point they're going to lose. Hey, if they lose on Monday, at least maybe it's good that they lose before Khris Middleton comes back, just so the like 0.001% of fans who are idiots who, think that like somehow this is an indictment of Khris Middleton or Pat Connaughton or whatever, get a little dose of reality. But yeah, obviously, there's pretty much nothing we can really complain about. You just hope that obviously you continue to stay healthy, get guys back rather than lose more guys. And just kind of keep competing at the level they have been. And you will lose games at some point, but I don't know. Obviously we have to kind of re-baseline our expectations a bit, right? It's early. They've had an advantageous schedule, but starting off 9-0, first time in franchise history, this team, looks like a much better regular season team. Not maybe a much better regular season, but definitely a better regular season team than I anticipated.
What happens if they go 44-0 and then lose Joe Ingles' first game back? That'd be a problematic situation for me.
Send him back. Send him in his white t-shirts. We'll send him back to you, Kane. You and Joe can, I don't know, work through your white t-shirt collections in Australia. I don't know. Let's not let's not think about that. I mean, I do want them to lose before the playoffs. I think going into the playoffs 82-0 probably wouldn't be a good thing. But I don't know. This is a pretty fun conversation to have, but yeah, we'll see. Oh, and by the way, one other thing, Bucks offense via cleaning the glass 13th, via Basketball Reference 14th. So top half, Kane. Top half. You were saying they're slightly below average. I found some websites that say they're slightly above average. So
I wonder how
put that in your Vegemite sandwich.
Yeah. Well, I normally I like cleaning the glass. There's no doubt about that. That's a very big source of where I get my stuff from. But as I look at NBA.com right here, that says 16. So, look, there's some discrepancies in the data there. But I'll take top half rather than bottom half. But it also is kind of cool if you're like, man, we're not even a top half offense, and we're still whooping all your asses and 9-0 on the season. So that's pretty cool to have here. But they play the Hawks tomorrow. The Hawks are a team that have given them some grief over the years in certain games. So my NBA app is telling me this game starts at 7:15 p.m. Central Time. It seems like an interesting tip-off time. But we'll be back. We'll have a post-game pod after this. And, geez, it would be cool if the Bucks started the season 10-0 for the first time in franchise history. Hopefully they keep it rolling. As Frank mentioned, Giannis is listed as probable.
Can I give you two more stats before we drop?
Okay, but we know this is going to go for 15 minutes. So I'll fire up the kettle. You go.
I can't let you stop. So just because Eric had the article about offensive rebounding, for those wondering where they are right now, they are via cleaning glass. They are seventh. They are seventh in offensive rebound rate, which obviously is very good. Wait, what were they at last? Let me just see what they were at last year. Last year they were 16th. Year before that, 12th. So they're at 30%, which is by far the highest of the Bud era. And I think the interesting thing, right, that one of the other questions that to me this raised was the transit, the trade-off involved is, are you then giving up more in transition because of that, right? You got to give up something, right? If you're doing this. So far, they're seventh in cleaning the glasses, kind of points added per possession of transition, or points added per possession from transition. Last year they were second, year before that third. So it's a little bit worse. But again, it's not like they suddenly are, a bad transition team because of this newfound focus on offensive rebounding. I do think it'll be interesting now that the book is out, now that Eric has spilled the beans. Boo Eric, informing us, but no, I'm sure scouts from other teams were paying attention to this. But I think it will be interesting. Just, do we see teams try to be more transition oriented as the season goes on? Obviously, the transition take foul thing is presumably, I think we'll see transition offense be a little bit better this year, regardless. But so I wouldn't worry about kind of the raw numbers as much as just sort of the relative rankings. But so they're down a little bit in the relative rankings. But we'll just sort of see, right? I think as the season winds on, teams will make adjustments, and the Bucks kind of changing a little bit of what they're doing in terms of covering the three-point line and maybe being a bit more aggressive in the offensive glass. I'm sure that both those things will be the targets of opponents. But the flip side too is, once you have Khris Middleton back, are you going to be needing to go after the offensive glass as hard as you were without him? I would say probably not. So we'll see if the Bucks also maybe cut back on some things, or you can't get hit out in transition if Khris Middleton is burying mid-range jumpers. So anyway, all right, Kane, that's my 15 minutes.
We got a podcast in approximately 24 hours, Frank. So let's save our voices. Let's save our voices for the post game tomorrow. Make sure you check it out though. If you haven't subscribed yet, and I know you've been listening and you've been subscribing because the numbers are going up, but make sure you subscribe. Make sure you comment on the video, get involved, and tell us what you thought about this show, any of the thoughts, the starting lineup perhaps, and we'll continue the discussion over there.
Trey is questionable.
YouTube.
I think Trey is questionable with the shin issue. So I don't know. Somehow I expect he's going to play, but hopefully we see Giannis and Trey, and hopefully the Bucks just do what they've been doing all year, but we'll see.
We'll be back after the game, post game, Locked On Bucks. Speak to you then.